Patricia Candace Walsh was born on December 18, 1966 in Seattle, Washington. Not much is known about her childhood or early upbringing. What we do know, however, is that Patricia was a devout Christian who believed deeply in spreading love through the Word of God. She was a member of Everyday Church, an evangelical congregation in Seattle that has since closed. Patricia's brother, Adam Walsh, remembered her as outgoing and free-spirited, the kind of person who could sit with anyone and share the gospel without expecting anything in return. Patricia later married Douglas Ziskowski, a fellow church member who shared her faith and ideals. The couple loved to travel and decided to hitchhike across the country to attend a religious workshop in Georgia. In November of 1989, they left Seattle together. Patricia's brother Adam later recalled that he last heard from her in December of 1989 during a phone call in which Patricia described their plan to hitchhike across the country. According to Adam, Patricia said they were hitchhiking as an act of faith. A friend of Patricia's from Georgia later stated that the couple felt called to the West to do the Lord's work. But tragically, on that path of faith, they encountered one of the darkest souls imaginable.
That same friend last saw Patricia and Douglas in January of 1990 when she dropped them off at Six Flags in Atlanta, Georgia. Shortly afterward, the minister from Everyday Church received a phone call from the couple in which they mentioned being in El Paso, Texas, and planned to head west towards Arizona. After that, no one ever heard from Patricia or Douglas ever again. Investigators later concluded that they had accepted a ride near El Paso from serial killer Robert Ben Rhodes, a long-haul truck driver who preyed on travelers and hitchhikers. Douglas was murdered soon after the couple boarded the truck. His body was discovered on January 21st, 1990, dumped on the side of Interstate 10 West in Sutton County, Texas, midway between San Antonio and El Paso. With her husband gone, Patricia was kept alive and held captive for nearly a week. During this time, she was brutally essayed and tortured by Robert. After not hearing from the couple for some time, Douglas's parents grew increasingly concerned. They set out on the road to search for their son, but their efforts turned up nothing. Eventually, they filed a missing persons report. However, even though Douglas's body was discovered in January of 1990, it remained unidentified until 1992. According to official reports, this long delay occurred because some of the information from Douglas's missing persons report was compromised during entry into the police computer system.
As for Patricia, her remains were discovered on October 26, 1990 by a group of deer hunters in a remote mountainous area near Interstate 15. The location was described as an isolated ridge covered with juniper trees, far from any signs of civilization. According to the official report, Patricia had been shot 4 times in the head and neck with a .22 caliber rifle. Evidence at the scene suggested that she was murdered there, and that her body appeared to have been deliberately positioned, with her braided hair draped over her shoulder. When investigators found her, there were no clothes, jewelry, or personal belongings nearby. With nothing to identify her, Patricia became known only as Jane Doe 1. For over a decade, her identity remained a mystery. During that time, her murder was believed to be connected to a string of unsolved killings known as the Great Basin Murders, a series of at least 9 women murdered between 1983 and 1997 across Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and Idaho. There were some similarities among all of these murders, as some of the victims' bodies were dumped near interstate highways that cut across the Great Basin region.
But 13 years after Patricia's tragic murder, in May of 2003, forensic anthropologist Dr. Walter Birkby from the University of Arizona finally solved the mystery of Jane Doe 1. Patricia was positively identified through her dental records. Captain John Kimball, who had been pursuing the case for over 12 years, recognized the connection between Patricia's murder and the earlier killing of her husband Douglas. That connection was formally confirmed in June of 2003, when a California Department of Justice worker contacted Texas Ranger Brooks Long, who had been investigating Patricia's disappearance. The inquiry about the unidentified Utah body finally bridged these two cases. On June 17, 2003, just one day after Jane Doe 1 was identified as Patricia, her brother Adam visited the Millard County Sheriff's Office. He had spent over a decade desperately searching for his sister, and now, with the identification confirmed, he shared with investigators everything he knew about her disappearance and travels. 2 years later in 2005, investigators finally gathered enough evidence to connect Patricia's and Douglas's cases to Robert Ben Rhodes, a man already serving a life sentence for another murder. But they were far from his only victims. Robert, who was infamously known as the truck stop killer, was confirmed to have murdered at least 2 couples in Illinois and Texas between 1989 and 1990. Authorities believe he may have tortured, essayed, and murdered more than 50 women between 1975 and 1990 based on his trucking routes and the disappearances of women matching his victim profile during those years.
But who was this man, Robert Ben Rhodes? Who was the stranger behind the wheel of that truck, the so-called truck stop killer who prowled America's highways for years without being caught? To understand the evil that took Patricia and Douglas's lives, we have to go back to where it all began. Robert was born on November 22, 1945 in Council Bluffs, Iowa. He was raised primarily by his mother while his father served in the military in West Germany. When his father returned from duty, he took a job as a firefighter, and by all appearances, the Rhodes family seemed to lead a stable, ordinary life. Robert was described as social and active. He was active in various school activities such as football, choir, wrestling, and the French club. His first run-in with the law came in 1961 at age 16 when he was arrested for tampering with a vehicle. The following year, he was arrested again, this time for public fighting. In 1964, Robert graduated from Monticello High School. After graduation, he enlisted in the Marine Corps. On the surface, it appeared that Robert was on the path to a respectable life, but in reality, it would be the complete opposite. That same year, his father was arrested for the essay of a 12-year-old girl. While awaiting trial, he removed himself from this earth. In 1968, Robert was dishonorably discharged from the Marine Corps for his involvement in a robbery. Between 1967 and 1968, he briefly attended college but eventually dropped out. He later attempted to join law enforcement, hoping to become a police officer, but was rejected due to his dishonorable discharge from the military. Upon returning to his hometown of Council Bluffs, Robert married and had a son. However, the marriage quickly deteriorated, and by 1972, at just 26 years old, his wife left him. In the years that followed, Robert married 2 more times, both ending in failure. His third wife, Deborah Davis, whom he was married to from 1987 to 1989, later spoke out about the violence she endured at his hands. While there are no official records confirming similar issues in his previous marriages, it's widely believed that his violent and controlling nature played a role in their collapses as well. Robert started a series of odd jobs, taking positions in stores, warehouses, supermarkets, and restaurants. But during the 1980s, his interest began to take a disturbing turn. He developed a deep fascination with BDSM. As his fantasies grew darker, he found a way to live them out through long-haul trucking. The job offered him isolation, anonymity, and a constant stream of potential victims along the highways.
Vanessa Veselka, who was a 15-year-old runaway hitchhiking on interstate highways in the summer of 1985, described that world, saying, "Truck stops in the 1980s were closed worlds where what went on passed unnoticed on the outside. The stores were dimly lit and filled with smoke, radically different from the family travel plazas of today. Magazine porn often dominated the aisles. Glossies like Hustler and Barely Legal, but also newsprint rags with cheap color covers. Bottles of isobutyl nitrate and rot gut aphrodisiacs like Locker Room and Spanish Fly crowded the counters by the register, along with the iconic bumper sticker, gas or grass, no one rides for free." Vanessa herself had run away with her 21-year-old boyfriend due to the problems they had at home. Together, they hitched rides from one place to another, living day to day. At one truck stop, while the trucker they were traveling with went to pay for gas, Vanessa and her boyfriend stepped away to use the restroom. When they returned, the truck was gone, along with all of Vanessa's belongings, including her guitar and knapsack. There were only her firearms left, which she later sold in New Orleans for some money. After about 6 weeks of this nomadic lifestyle, Vanessa and her boyfriend got into an argument at a station and decided to go their separate ways, each hitching rides on different trucks. Without a fake ID, Vanessa couldn't stay in shelters, and sleeping on the roadside made her an easy target. To stay safe, she began hitchhiking from one truck to another, constantly moving in circles. She recalled, the general rule was that you were a prostitute until proven otherwise, and then you were still a prostitute. The Citizens Band radio was really popular among long-haul truckers at the time. The radio used a short-range communication system that truck drivers can use to talk to each other while on the road. Back in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, it was the main way truckers shared road info, asked for directions, or just talked to kill time. Since Vanessa was on the run, she had learned to survive with almost nothing, and that meant relying on truckers for rides, food, and safety, even when the environment was anything but safe. She quickly realized that walking into truck stop diners wasn't an option, as waitresses would kick her out before she could even ask for help, so she was forced to wait by the showers and hallways, hoping to find a driver willing to take her along. Over time, she figured out safer ways to travel. Instead of speaking on the Citizens Band radio herself, which would instantly attract a storm of vulgar comments, she would ask a trucker to use the radio for her. They would come up with sympathetic cover stories to make her sound less suspicious. These stories usually revolved around a dead grandparent, a sick mom, or a jerk boyfriend who stole her car and her money. In 1985, Vanessa saw police find the body of a young hitchhiker in a truck stop dumpster and realized it could have easily been her. Sometime later, she was picked up by a polite-looking trucker who turned disturbingly cold mid-ride. He began talking about the murdered girl and mentioned something called the Laughing Death Society. The society turned out to be just a made-up name. Eventually, he pulled over by a wooded area, drew a knife, and ordered Vanessa to move to the back of the truck. Vanessa tried to calm him, begging him not to hurt her and promising to stay silent, but his face went blank, cold, and empty. After a long pause, he said one word: run. Vanessa sprinted into the woods, hiding until his truck disappeared down the highway. Shaken and in shock, she returned to the road and kept hitchhiking, never reporting the incident for years.
But in 2012, the haunting memories of that day would come back to Vanessa once again. By then, she had long left behind her life on the road. She graduated from Reed College and built a new life as a writer, publishing both fiction and nonfiction. That spring, a friend sent her a news article about serial killer Robert Ben Rhodes, asking if he might have been the man that once threatened her life. Although Vanessa couldn't recognize him at first from the initial photos, she soon noticed some similarities to Robert's older pictures, especially his cheekbones, glasses, and other facial expressions. Vanessa didn't realize that Robert was infamous, but as she came across various documentaries, articles, and books about the truck stop killer, she soon realized that this most probably was the same guy who held her at knife point. So, she began looking into him.
The investigation into Robert was complex and stretched across 5 different states, involving multiple police departments and federal agencies. Tracking his crimes wasn't easy, as they spanned thousands of miles and victims were found far from where they disappeared. Eventually, the FBI Houston's office took the lead, since nearly every major clue pointed back to Texas. Robert lived there, his wife Deborah Davis was from there, and 2 of his known victims, Regina K. Walters and Ricky Lee Jones, were also from Texas. Even several other women he picked up had last been seen in Texas. During her own search for answers, Vanessa reached out to retired FBI special agents Mark Young and Robert F. Lee, both of whom had worked directly on Robert's case. Vanessa told the agents everything about the trucker, the Laughing Death Society, and the moment he pulled out a knife. Agent Young noted that the man's way of controlling her through fear matched Robert's psychological profile. He then showed Vanessa a photo of a woman named Shauna Holtz, one of Robert's few victims who actually made it out alive. Shauna had escaped less than a month after Patricia's murder. She was only 18 at the time, but had been living on the road since she was 12. By her own account, she had been assaulted nearly 20 times. Like Vanessa, she had learned how to survive the dark world of truck stops, but her run-in with Robert would take her straight into hell. When Robert picked Shauna up, he chained her inside the back of his truck, which he had turned into a torture chamber. For weeks, he assaulted and tormented her while driving across the country. Her nightmare finally ended when Robert stopped at a brewery in Houston, where she managed to escape and run for her life. Agent Young told Vanessa that Robert hadn't left Shauna shackled. He had simply told her to sit there and be a good girl. When Shauna escaped, she still had a chain around her neck. Both her head and body had been shaved by Robert, and she had no clothes on. It was more than enough evidence to put Robert away for years and open up a real investigation into what else he had done. But that never happened. Shauna refused to press charges, claiming that there wasn't enough evidence. According to her, "I don't see any good in filing charges. It's just going to be my word against his. there was any evidence, I would file charges and sue him. Even though it was an open secret that women were being found dead along interstate highways and that truckers were thought to be the ones behind it, law enforcement couldn't pin anything concrete on Robert. And so, Robert walked free.
Later on, Vanessa got in touch with Robert's third wife, Deborah Davis. Deborah told her that back in 1985, Robert was driving for a trucking company out of Georgia, one that had an office right off of I-95. The two had met a few years earlier in the early 80s at a Houston bar called Chip Kickers, where Robert had shown up dressed as a pilot. When Vanessa shared her story of her encounter with the truck driver, the one she suspected to be Robert, Deborah grew excited and remarked, "That's him. That's exactly like him." Deborah also recounted how Robert would initially leave his gun at home and take a knife instead. When Vanessa recounted other details about her assailant, like the cab of his truck and the clothes he was wearing, her suspicions only grew stronger as Deborah assured her that it sounded just like Robert. Like FBI agents Mark Young and Robert F. Lee, Deborah had never heard of the so-called Laughing Death Society that Vanessa's attacker mentioned. But when Vanessa asked if that ruled Robert out, Deborah disagreed. She explained that Robert had always been fascinated by secret societies and psychological manipulation. She then recounted the case of Colleen Stan, a 21-year-old hitchhiker kidnapped in 1977 by a couple who held her captive for 7 years. They forced her to sleep in a wooden box under their bed and convinced her that a secret group called the Company would hunt her down if she ever tried to escape. Deborah told her that Bob was obsessed with how they used an imaginary secret society to keep her from running away.
In the early morning hours of April 1st, 1990, Trooper Mike Miller of the Arizona Highway Patrol noticed a truck pulled over on the shoulder of Interstate 10 near Casa Grande with its hazard lights blinking through the dark. When he went to check it out, he was hit with something straight out of a nightmare. Inside the sleeper cab, 28-year-old Lisa Pinnell was handcuffed, naked, and screaming for her life. Robert was right there, caught red-handed. First, he tried to talk his way out of the situation. When he realized he was cornered, he went for his gun, but failed. He was cuffed and left in the patrol car. Despite being secured, he made a desperate, near-successful attempt to escape. He was quickly apprehended and subsequently charged with aggravated assault, essay, and unlawful imprisonment. This dramatic arrest was only the beginning. Detective Rick Barnhart took the case and, through dedicated follow-up investigation, connected Rhodes to a pattern of other crimes stretching back at least 5 months.
When Lisa was rescued, she was speaking in what sounded like a jumble of irrational statements, talking about secret prisons and a desperate mission to see the president. It was obvious she wasn't in the right state of mind after spending days trapped inside of Robert's rolling torture chamber. But what stood out was how much her case resembled Shauna's. It's like Robert deliberately went after women he believed were vulnerable, the kind who wouldn't be believed in court. Back then, detectives often dismissed victims like Lisa, barely taking notes during interviews because they seemed too unstable to testify. Lisa's statement that night was at least caught on video. According to FBI agent Robert F. Lee, most people believe Lisa was a sex worker and what happened to the truck was merely a transaction gone bad. He explained, saying, Lisa was talking all sorts of crazy stuff. Microchips in her brain, holes in the ozone layer. She was wearing those slippers, but she was telling the truth. Even though Lisa's statements were all over the place, the cops had more than enough solid evidence to nail Robert. There was no denying that he held her captive and tortured her. But Robert ended up pleading guilty to kidnapping with intent to commit SA. In December of 1990, he was sentenced to just 6 years in prison.
For the crimes he had committed, 6 years felt like a slap on the wrist. But that, however, was about to change. September 29th, 1990, the decomposed body of 14-year-old Regina K. Walters was found nude in the loft of an abandoned barn near Greenville, Illinois. Regina was a runaway just like Vanessa once was, traveling with her 18-year-old boyfriend Ricky Lee Jones. The couple was picked up by Robert in February of 1990. Ricky was killed soon after, and his partial skeleton was later found near Harleton, Texas on May 26, 1990, with evidence showing that he had been shot. As for Regina, she was kept alive only to suffer the same horrifying fate as Patricia and countless other women who unfortunately crossed paths with Robert. He also shaved her head and body, pierced her skin with fishing hooks, and tormented her for days. At one point, Robert dressed Regina in a black dress and heels, forcing her to pose for photos while terrified. When he was finally satisfied, Robert strangled her with a garrote made of baling wire, leaving her body to decompose in an abandoned barn off Interstate 70. Regina's autopsy report confirmed that she had died by strangulation sometime in early March of that year. In February of 1992, while Robert was already locked away in an Arizona jail, investigators executed a search of his home and discovered a collection of truly horrifying photographs. In one of these photos, the face of Regina K. Walters could be seen. She was barely recognizable. Though some agents initially couldn't match her with a photo provided by Regina's mother, FBI agent Young definitively identified Regina by a small gap in her teeth. On the same roll of film was a picture of another girl wearing a gray hoodie. Detectives theorized that Robert had just picked her up as her hair was still long and hadn't been shaved. She was later identified as Pamela Milliken of Saskatchewan after police posted her picture on Facebook. She said that she was hitchhiking to go find her brother in Winnipeg when she ended up in Robert's truck. When he snapped a photo of her after she just got in, she asked why, and he told her that he kept photos of his passengers so that he could show them to the cops in case anyone ever robbed him and fled. Pamela shared that, "He told me he was going to Florida and he wanted me to come with him. At one point, he pointed to a sign on his dashboard that said cash, grass, or ass, no one rides for free. I didn't have any money, I didn't smoke pot, so I knew which one it would be." According to Pamela, they had what she described as a consensual encounter and he dropped her off at a bus depot in Winnipeg. Regina's mother, Carolyn Walters, said in an interview from her home in Grapeland, Texas, that she was convinced the killer had called Regina's father, Jerry Walters, around the time their daughter had went missing. Regina's parents had just separated when she disappeared. Carolyn never revealed the exact details of that phone call possibly made by Robert. Jerry also never spoke about the call. But investigators confirmed it was placed after the time Regina was believed to have been murdered. The caller also made sadistic remarks about what had been done to the young woman. Brenda Oldham, the deputy county attorney who prosecuted Robert, told the court that he had welded metal bars with hooks into the back of his truck. He'd used those hooks to fasten chains tied with the horse bridle he had forced his victims to wear around their necks. Brenda also said that some of Regina's photos were shown to Robert in jail, and although he made no claims, his face turned white as a ghost, and he looked as if he was about to pass out. Nessa also later reported finding a page from Regina's notebook. On it, Robert had drawn a gun and a large dagger dripping with blood, next to the words, "Ricky is a dead man." In September of 1992, Robert finally pled guilty to the murder of Regina Walters. That same month, he was convicted at the Menard Correctional Center in Chester, Illinois, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Robert's other victims were laid to rest with love and dignity. 14-year-old Regina Walters was buried at Mount Zion Cemetery in the Woodlands, Texas. Her 18-year-old boyfriend, Ricky Lee Jones, rests in Baileytown Christian Church Cemetery in Stokes County, North Carolina. As for Patricia Walsh and Douglas Ziskowski, they were both laid to rest at St. Patrick's Cemetery in Kent, Washington. Years later, in 2005, Robert was extradited to Utah to face trial for the murders of Patricia Walsh and Douglas Ziskowski, but following the requests of the victims' families who didn't want to endure the pain of testifying again, the charges were dropped in 2006 and Robert was sent back to Illinois. Eventually, in 2012, Robert appeared before a West Texas judge and pled guilty to 2 counts of capital murder as part of a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. In exchange, he was given 2 more life sentences. Even though Robert sits behind bars for 4 confirmed murders and 2 charges of SA, the true scope of his crimes remains unknown, and it's likely far darker than what's been proven. For context, when an Illinois state trooper circulated a forensic description of Regina K. Walters as a Caucasian female ages 13 to 15 who had vanished within the last 6 to 9 months, he received over 900 matches. Detectives believe that at his peak, Robert was murdering 1 to 3 women every month. But his rampage has long ended. While Robert has been sitting away for the rest of his miserable life in prison since his 1992 conviction, one of his victims, Vanessa Veselka, has not only outlived his miseries, but has spoken volumes about them. Today, Vanessa stands as an award-winning author and survivor whose voice carries the weight of countless untold stories.
Wanted to take this time because one question I see that comes up a lot when we cover serial killers is, why are there no serial killers anymore? And I think that's important to talk about. And the short answer is, it's not that there's no serial killers anymore. They still exist, but the thing is most people who would be serial killers nowadays get caught before they even reach serial killer status.
Or they just decide not to do that because you're going to get caught. There's so many ways to get caught right now.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not that serial killers don't have this sense of preservation. If you look back at some earlier serial killers, they weren't just killing all the time. Some would go years without killing their next victim. You look at DNA analysis and databases, how far those have come, linking people to crimes. Think about how many killers have been caught, not just past killers, but recent killers. I think
think about that. Like things have changed since the golden ages of the serial killer too. So back then you didn't have to worry about the toll booths tracking your every moment down the highways. You didn't have to worry about this nice little computer thing in your back pocket that's tracking everywhere that you're going or who you're talking to or your movements on social media.
It's so easy for police to triangulate with cell phone towers where somebody's position is.
Right. So I really feel a lot of people that would be inclined to do such terrible things just aren't willing to take that chance, which is a good thing.
And you look at social media as well, people are more apt to document these things. So we look at how Robert Ben Rhodes flourished on truck stops and highways. This is an area where there wasn't a whole lot of scrutiny and not a whole lot of public knowledge about. Nowadays, anybody can put stuff online. With a cell phone, you can document anything, anywhere. So I think that is a big, big factor here in why things have changed as it pertains to this. And as far as the Great Basin murders, which we touched on, that Robert Ben Rhodes was linked to, there are several men who have also been linked to this. Scott William Cox, Keith Hunter Jesperson, Hal Williams, Dale Wayne Eaton, Clark Perry Baldwin. And I believe all the victims from the Great Basin murders have been identified. Maybe Shattered Jane Doe has not. Shattered Jane Doe has not been identified. Other than that, all of them have been identified. The most recent being 2022, Bitter Creek Betty was identified as Irene Vasquez. And obviously there's still struggles in identifying recent John and Jane Does, but we are more successful in identifying them than we ever have been in previous decades. And being able to identify victims helps talk to family, people who knew them, helps bring clues. Hey, where did you last see them? Who were they with? Who were they talking to? And that can help identify who a serial killer is and catch them before they go too far.
And I think with the advent again of social media, a lot of Jane Doe and John Doe pictures get circulated in various groups, and someone may know this person, or for example, a lot of these DNA kits like Ancestry or 23andMe or MyHeritage, any of the big ones that people know, by people using them, some of the John and Jane Does get identified. But also in using them, that's where we're seeing a lot of serial killers get found, like BTK, for example. So when you're catching people like BTK, or even like Golden State Killer, for example, was another one that was caught somewhat recently. This is good. It's why we don't have folks running around doing these terrible things now. However, it's very important that we scrutinize the patterns and the ways they went about doing things like that, so we don't repeat those types of mistakes from the past, so they can't happen again. Because a lot of it just happens out on the open road. And a lot of times serial killers, they're inflating the amount of people they may or may not have killed, or even claiming ones they didn't. So for example, many, many years ago, we talked about Henry Lee Lucas. Yeah. He operated on the road too. And who knows? Yeah. Who knows how many people
he's claimed so many people, and some of them were proven not true. And sadly, a lot of them, we can't say heads or tails if they were him or not.
So I really feel enclosed, yeah, this might not be necessarily like a problem of today as much, but it's, worth trying to find some of those people because there's many out there. There's
Yeah,
many
there's
out there from
still
that time
cases that need
period,
to
the
be
golden
solved.
age.
Hmm.
There's probably so many out there that have just never gotten caught.
I know some people find serial killers fascinating, either from a psychological perspective or even just the history of how they've operated in America all the way up through. If this is something you want us to cover more and look into more cases like these, leave us a comment down below.